All right, hello, welcome to the last video in our chapter 3 video series. So this is part 2 of your chapter 3 material, which covers tissues and histology, which is the study of tissues. So as I alluded to in the cell diversity lesson, there are 4 major types of tissues. And this is the order in which we're going to cover those. So epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Epithelial and connective are by far the most numerous. They have the most different examples. Muscle just has the 3 that we talked about in the last video, and nervous tissue is just one example. So epithelial and connective are going to take up more of your time as you're learning and going through those, so just be prepared to see that. And by the time you get to muscle and nervous, you're going to be like, oh, that's it? There's nothing more to those? So that's kind of a common feeling. And then also you're going to have an opportunity to take a look at these tissues under the microscope in lab. So that's why in this lecture presentation, I'm showing a lot of them in that micrographic view. So you'll have some familiarity and you can actually use this video as practice and review for your lab tests, your lab practicum. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Having a little bit of trouble with my camera, so hopefully it'll let me finish this last video of the day. All right, so we're going to start with epithelial tissues. And before we get to some examples, we got to learn kind of their naming scheme. How do we name our epithelial tissues? Well, they have like a first name and a last name. So the first name is based on their layering. So we have simple, which means a single layer of cells, or we have stratified, which is 2 or more layers of cells. Okay, so we're either going to have a simple or stratified with a few exceptions. We'll see later. And then their second name is based on their shape. Are we a squamous cell, which means flat like a fried egg, kind of thin? Are we cuboidal, like the name implies, like a cube? Or are we columnar, like a tall rectangle? So we can have any number of combination of these names. We can have simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, if it's single layers of each of those shapes. Or we could have stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, and stratified columnar if there are multiple layers of those different shapes. And that's exactly what we see. So our first tissue, we're going to cover the squamous. So we have simple and stratified squamous shown in these micrographs. So the simple is probably the hardest one to see because it's so thin. It's just a single layer of flattened shaped cells. So I'm going to I'll use maybe my orange pen for this. So I'm going to draw over here. This is the very base of the simple layer. And this is the surface, what we call the apical surface of the cell, right? So if we're going from the attachment point, what we call the basement membrane, to the free edge, the very surface of the cell, we can see that it's just a single cell layer thick and it's flattened cells. There's also a simple squamous cell over here. This is a capillary in the lung. So there's a single layer here, and there's the top of it. So that is a simple squamous epithelium. It's a little bit harder over here because it's not quite zoomed in, but that would be my basement membrane, and here would be my free edge. So there's my single layer of flattened cells. Okay. The bottom 2 pictures are representing my stratified squamous. So here, this yellow line, that's going to be the attachment point. You might be able to see the difference between this tissue here is epithelial, and this tissue down here is connective, kind of the more lighter pink. So here's our surface, and there's a whole lot of layers, all the way from here to here of flattened cells. So that's going to be our stratified squamous. Here's another one over here. Here's our basement membrane, kind of squiggly boundary. Here's our surface. So there's many layers of cells in that stratified squamous epithelium. Okay. Simple squamous epithelium, talk about function instead of just identifying them. Because it's so thin, they're really good at places lining things that don't need a lot of protection, like internal lighting. And they're good for diffusion, moving things from one place to the other. So here, in your lungs, oxygen moves through your alveolus into your blood capillary through these really thin cell layers. Your stratified squamous epithelium is found on your skin. So it's really thick and dry and keratinized, and it keeps your internal organs protected. All right. Our next tissue is going to be our cuboidal shape. So here I will find my basement membrane. Here's my free edge, because this looks like it's the lining of a tube. Here's my basement membrane. Here's my free edge. So we have a single layer of cube-shaped cells. So that's my simple cuboidal. Okay. This one picture is a little bit tricky because it's back-to-back simple cuboidal. So there's the basement membrane. Here's the free edge. Single layer of cube-shaped cells. Okay, so that's our simple cuboidal. These are found lining ducts and tubes usually. So the picture on the top is from your kidney. The picture on the bottom is from your gland, your thyroid gland. Over on the right, this is our example of stratified cuboidal. So there's our basement membrane, there's our free edge, and we can kind of see two stacked layers of these cube-shaped cells. That one's nucleus is missing. Just out of the picture, not that it's actually missing a nucleus. So that would be our stratified cuboidal epithelium, and those are usually found lining ducts like your sweat gland or oil gland ducts. And then our last kind of these name combinations is our simple and stratified columnar. So here's our basement membrane, also known as the lamina propria. Here's our free edge, and we have a single layer of column-shaped cells. Okay. We can see that over here. This is a nice picture of your intestines, right? So there's our basement membrane, there's our free edge, and so we have a whole bunch of these column-shaped cells all in a line like columns. So your simple columnar is found lining your entire, well, most of your digestive tract from your stomach down through your small intestine and large intestine. And so you're going to find that it's good for absorbing all those nutrients. Down at the bottom here, we have a stratified columnar. And really the only upper layer of cells are the column-shaped cells. The base ones, the first layer there, almost look cuboidal. So you might be saying, well, how do I name it? Is it stratified cuboidal because the first layer is cubed, or is it stratified columnar because the top layer is columnar? The answer is you always go with the top layer. So if it is a stratified tissue, you name it based on the shape of the uppermost layer of cells. Okay, all right. This last slide of epithelial tissue are the kind of oddballs. They don't quite fit into the simple stratified and the three shapes naming scheme because they're just a little bit different. So first we have transitional epithelium, and so that's these two here. Transitional, those are both pictures. Transitional is found lining your urinary bladder. And think about what your bladder does throughout the day. It stretches when it's full of urine, and then when you go pee, it empties and it recoils. So it stretches and it recoils. So we have to have a lining that has the ability to do that as well. So here's our basement membrane, and here's our free edge. So at first it kind of looks like stratified cuboidal, but we know stratified cuboidal isn't that thick. Here's the free edge, because in our last picture of stratified cuboidal, it only had like 2 layers thick. So that's a good clue that you're looking at transitional if your first thought is stratified cuboidal and it's really, really thick. Another clue that you're looking at transitional is it kind of has these domed, kind of bubbly shaped cells on that apical surface. So hopefully you'll see that in lab. And these are relaxed. So when your bladder is empty, they're kind of pushed in on themselves. If we were able to see a full bladder, that transitional epithelium would go really thin. So it transitions to stretched out to empty, stretched out and empty. So we can't really say it's stratified or simple because when it's stretched out, it seems simple because all of the cells kind of lay across from each other. So that is your transitional epithelium. The next one is called pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium. It's got a long name. Pseudo means false, falsely stratified. And cilia are these little hairs that you see on the top. So here's my basement membrane, and here's my free edge. Okay. It looks like there's multiple layers of cells because it looks like there might be a layer of nuclei here, a layer of nuclei here, and a layer of nuclei here. But in reality, there isn't multiple layers of cells. That's the pseudo-stratified part. They are just single column-shaped cells that kind of connect way down towards the tip here, And then this cell might not go all the way up to the top. It just might be right here. The cell only goes to right here, but this cell might come back here and sneak in behind and attach. So we don't have multiple layers. It's pseudostratified. This tissue is found lining mainly your upper respiratory tract, like your trachea, and the cilia beat, and they help to propel mucus and debris and stuff up towards your throat for either swallowing or spitting out, kind of gunk and stuff. All right, so those are our epithelial tissues. Connected, I don't want to say that word. In relation to epithelial tissues, we're going to talk really quickly about glands, because glands are modified epithelial tissues. So your sweat glands, your endocrine glands, they're derived from epithelial tissue. So just real quickly, there's two major groups. We have exocrine here. Exocrine glands secrete their product onto a surface, like sweat or tears or mucus or hydrochloric acid in your stomach. They're secreting it outside onto a surface. It doesn't always have to be the outside of your body, like your saliva goes to the outside surface in your mouth, but your mouth is technically inside your body. So don't get lulled into thinking that exocrine glands can only go to the exterior surface. They can go to a surface. Endocrine glands, endo meaning to the inside, they secrete their products into the bloodstream. We can see that here. And then this is just a real life example showing your pancreas has both endocrine and exocrine glands. Exocrine is the buffer and the mucus, or endocrine is the hormones. So a lot of times you can connect endocrine to hormones because hormones are secreted into the blood to get where they need to go. Okay. All right, so now we're on to connective tissues. So again, like I said, epithelial and connective are going to take the most time because there's so many different examples. So the first connective tissue we're looking at here is osseous tissue, which is the same thing as bone. Different color here. So this is what bone looks like. It's one of the coolest under the microscope because to me it looks like cross sections of trees. It's really easy to identify. It's a solid connective tissue. It forms your bones, gives you nice strength, but also some tiny little bit of flexibility because bones are about 2/3 calcium, which is the crystal, and about 1/3 collagen, which is a flexible fiber. So it allows your bones to have strength, yet a little bit of flexibility so they're not too brittle that they're going to break at any moment. You'll learn a lot more about bones in the skeletal system chapter coming up in a few weeks. All right, the next connective tissue is cartilage, and there's 3 types of cartilage that we're going to take a look at. So the first type is called hyaline. Oops, let me get that right. Hyaline is the most common type of cartilage found in your body. It is what makes up the cartilage of your nose. It's the cartilage that is found on the ends of your long bones. It's the cartilage that makes up your part of your rib cage. So it's very common. This cartilage is called elastic. And it is called elastic because you can see all these little black lines, kind of all these fibers in here, all these little kind of stringy things. That's elastic fibers, and it gives flexibility. This flappiness of my ear, that's because that structure of my ear is made out of elastic cartilage. The other place you find it is in the epiglottis, which is the flap that closes down when you swallow, protects your trachea so you don't choke. And then this last one is called fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is really dense. You see, again, all these kind of stringy fibers. These aren't elastic fibers, these are collagen, which gives it a lot of strength. Fibrocartilage is found in the discs between your vertebrae, your vertebral discs. And if you know of anybody who's got a meniscus damage in their knee, or at their knee joint, there's these pads of cartilage in your knee called the meniscus, and those are your fibrocartilage pads. So cartilage in general usually helps to reduce friction. It kind of pads and gives some structure to some things. And then these 3 types, they each have their own slight unique characteristic that makes them the best for whatever their job is. Okay. This next group of connective tissues, these are called dense connective tissues, or we have dense, They're just showing dense regular connective tissue. This is just mainly collagen fibers. If you see all these kind of lines, kind of the squiggly lines running all in the same direction, parallel to each other, those are all collagen fibers with a few fibroblast cells kind of squeezed in there. They make tissues like tendons, right? So all those collagen fibers are going to be going in that one direction, gives a really strong strength pulling in that side or in that direction that the fibers are running. So tendons and ligaments. Tendons connect muscle to bone. And if I had, say, like a ligament here, ligament connects bone to bone. So if you didn't know that, like if you thought they were interchangeable or wasn't quite sure, so now you know, tendons connect muscle to bone, ligaments connect bone to bone. Okay. The next is loose connective tissues and fluid connective tissues. I kind of put the fluid connective tissues on the same slide here. So we have three types of loose connective tissue shown on this slide. We have areolar, we have adipose, and we have reticular. So I'll get those named. Areolar connective tissue is often found like the basement membrane. So we just got done talking about epithelial tissue. So the connection to that underlying layer is made up of areolar connective tissue. So your epithelial cells will be attached to that basement membrane. Adipose tissue, fat storage. We kind of saw that a little bit already earlier. And reticular connective tissue is very fibrous. It creates a three-dimensional framework. Think of like liver and lymph node and bone marrow, where cells are kind of filling in this three-dimensional fibrous framework, and that's your reticular connective tissue. So areolar, adipose, and reticular are your loose connective tissues, and then your liquid connective tissue is blood. We kind of saw that in the diversity slides. So blood is made up of red blood cells and white blood cells in this fluidy plasma that carries nutrients and oxygen around your entire body. Okay. Whew. So epithelial and connective tissues, there's a lot to cover, so make sure you get help as you're going through all these tissues. You can, again, use these pictures to help you study. Make sure you're looking at good microscope slides, and you can always ask for help if you need some more assistance in figuring out which is which. All right, the last tissue is our muscle tissue. And I mentioned this already in the cell diversity slide, and I think these are the same pictures I used in that slide as well. So skeletal muscle are the muscles that are attached to your bones. They are consciously controlled, very long and skinny. They're called muscle fibers a lot of times. And what's cool about them is they're striated. If you'll notice, they have these little stripes on them. So that can help you distinguish skeletal muscle from other things. Then we have cardiac over here. So cardiac muscle is also striated, so you'll notice it has these little stripes, but it's not quite as long and skinny. It has some branching nature to it. Right, so we have these muscle cells that are branched. So cardiac muscle isn't long and skinny. It does have striations, but it's involuntary. You cannot control cardiac muscle. It's going to beat whether you want it to or not. Well, we want it to, but we don't have conscious control over cardiac muscle. And then the last is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found around the walls of your hollow organs. It's hard to see the cells here, but they're just these kind of tapering cells that kind of look like this. And they're all squished and sandwiched together into this one tissue called smooth muscle tissue. It is also involuntary, and it's smooth because it does not have the striations. That's kind of where it got its name from. So no striations found in the walls of your hollow organs. And involuntary. All right, our last tissue is nervous tissue. So these are exemplified by our neurons, and so you can kind of see those. I'll highlight them in green here. So they have all of these processes that come off of them. So they're really like spiny. Green doesn't show up here on the blue. They look like octopuses or something that's kind of spiny, and they usually have a long process here called the axon. So our slides mainly look like this one. Here you'll see these purpley neurons in lab. Nervous tissue has the ability to conduct electrical impulses. So basically what happens is, I'll draw a very basic simple one here. You have this neuron that gets excited, and it'll fire this impulse all the way down the axon until it reaches the end to release little neurotransmitters that will then tell an organ, to do something. And that's how our neurons work. And you'll be learning about that in chapter 7, because we're going to be covering the nervous system at the end of this term. All right, so those are all of our tissues. There's one last slide associated with this video. The end of chapter 3 talks a little bit about tissue and wound repair. So most of our wounds come through our skin or just to our skin. And we'll be looking at the integumentary system next as our first body system. But wound healing has a lot to do with epithelial tissue. And so in this particular case, it looks like the wound is going through the epidermis and the dermis and to the fat all the way down to a blood vessel, it looks like. But all of these tissues, your epithelial tissue, this particular type of connective tissue, adipose tissue, they all have the ability to regenerate themselves. So we have stem cells in the epithelium, we have stem cells in the dermis, we have stem cells in the adipose tissue. And so as they repair, they lay down scar tissue and then just kind of push that scab, that temporary patch in place, and just kind of moves that up until your new fresh replacement tissue is underneath it, and the scab falls off. And that helps to prevent infection because it's a quick blood clotting and it's a quick scab forming, and that keeps bacteria from coming in. And if there is, we have white blood cells coming in and gobbling things up and keeping the environment nice and clean. So the major takeaway from this is just knowing that in these superficial tissues, your epithelium and your connective tissues, we have stem cells that have the ability to replace damaged and worn out tissues. All right, there's our chapter 3. So it is chapters 1, 2, and 3 that will be on the first lecture exam, and similar topics, whatever labs are covered that cover those similar topics in the first lab exam. So always, as needed, send questions via email, course messages, or stop by an office hour, or maybe find me in the hallway during lab time. I'd be happy to help. All right, see you next time. Bye.